To get to our put-in at entry point 30, from Ely, go east 19 miles on the Fernberg Trail. There's a large parking lot, since this is one of the most popular starting points in the Boundary Waters. Probably because of the very accessible beach and the easy put-in. Here's a quick summary of where we went. First we head east, past the Canoeing Lodge. Then south to the 2 portages separated by a small pond. Then we'll cross the rest of the numbered lakes to 3 short portages. After a full day's paddle, we spent our first night on the north arm of Hudson Lake.
Here we are just off the beach heading east towards Canoeing Lodge. Go left around this corner. Go due east until you hit land, then go north. This part of the trip can be a little tricky, but the lodge is only 15 minutes away and other paddlers are doing the same thing. These are the last buildings you'll see on this trip. You can also launch from here for a small fee. It might be worth it to park your car in a safer place where there's always somebody around.
From here, we head south through a narrow channel. At this point, the map can be a little confusing because you'll see a lot more islands than there are on the map. Trust your compass and head south-southwest until you see this campsite on the opposite shore. If you follow the left shore around the lake, you'll be pretty safe. It's about a mile to the first portage, but you don't have to portage if you don't want to. This is a big lake with good fishing and a dozen campsites. Many people just spend their whole vacation right here.
There are as many ways to portage in the Boundary Waters as there are people. This is the most popular route, and you will see many other people, especially on weekends. But in 6 weeks of paddling here, this is the only time that we saw such a crowd. An easy 30-rod portage brings you to a small pond where you can see the second portage. This portage is 40 rods long and brings you to Lake 2.
If this is your first time here, don't be too concerned about portages. You may have to make an extra trip the first few times, but after you've done a couple, you'll be an old pro. We usually carry our Duluth packs across first so we can see what the trail is like. Then we walk back and get the canoe and the day packs.
If it's getting late, there are 18 campsites on Lake 3. You may want to spend the night here if it's really windy. Of course, you may have to share the site with the animals that were there first. Paddling across the mile of open water brings you to Lake 4. It's almost 2 miles to the eastern end of Lake 4, where you'll find the portages to Hudson Lake.
This 25-rod portage brings you to a lovely little pond. It's too bad there's no campsite. We would have stayed here. "5 minutes on the water, and you're unloading your canoes again." This 25-rod portage follows some interesting rapids. When we were here in June, there was a lot of water here, but now in August, there's just a trickle. We got tired of these short little portages, so when we got to the last one, we just lifted the canoe over the rocks on the right, rather than walking the official portage on the left.
We finally made it to Hudson Lake after about 4 hours of paddling and 2 hours of portaging. followed the left shore to the northern arm of Hudson Lake, where we found this nice campsite. Remember, you can only camp in designated campsites. Each has a fire grate, a pit toilet, a tent pad, and a fantastic view. One of the first camp chores that Bob usually does is to filter some water. It's a good idea to either filter, boil, or treat the water to get rid of the giardia, which is everywhere these days.
Then we just settled down for the evening and enjoyed the sunset.
Early morning is one of my favorite times in the wilderness. Everything is so still and quiet, and the mist just hangs over the water.
After 3 days of exploring this area, it was time to move on. From our campsite on Hudson Lake, we head north to the short portage to Fire Lake. Then head west through 2 short portages to Lake 4. This is where we met the Rice Lake strippers. When we got to Lake 3, we followed a channel between the islands to the southeast corner of the lake.
We didn't get too far up Hudson Lake before we met Tom and Ann. She had just caught a 31-inch pike and generously shared it with us for lunch. While the best fishing is early or late in the season, we did see people catching pike and walleye throughout our trip. This part of Hudson is narrow and winding, our favorite paddling.
The portage to Fire Lake is a little tricky to find. Just a short ways past the second campsite, you'll see a pyramid-shaped rock just before the lake gets real skinny. The 10-rod portage is here on the right. Look for open sky through the trees. Fire Lake runs east-west, and there is one campsite on the eastern end, but we went west past another campsite. By the way, even though this was the first week of August, all 5 of the campsites in this area were vacant when we went by.
While most people use canoes in the Boundary Waters, we did see several kayaks. We met Dawn, who was on an impressive 12-day solo trip to Canada. She cleverly uses a foam yoke to portage her kayak. Speaking of portages, there's a flat 20-rod portage which leads to a quiet, peaceful marsh where you can cross in 5 minutes. The second portage is 30 rods long and brings you to an extreme eastern end of Lake 4.
Here are the Rice Lake Strippers. It's a club of avid canoeists who built their own beautiful wood strip canoes. They told us it took a whole winter to build a canoe.
One of the joys of canoeing here is the wildlife. We saw several bald eagles and lots of other birds, as you'll see. When we got to Lake 3, we followed the channel to the eastern side to a big rock campsite on the southern side of the lake.
We thought it was going to be just another beautiful day in paradise, but the loons had a special treat in store for us. Just before sunset, we heard the unmistakable call of the loons. Before long, there were about a dozen loons that appeared to be square dancing. We read later that this is a traditional social gathering for loons. You can just make them out there in the sun's reflection.